Hello, everyone. I am Dr. John Watson. I am the narrator tonight, and I invite you to join me on a journey into the darkest corners of London's past, where shadows cling to gaslit streets and the human heart reveals its most profound mysteries. Many a night have I sat by the flickering fire at Baker Street, chronicling the astonishing exploits of my singular friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes. His intellect, a dazzling beacon against the fog of ignorance, has illuminated countless, bewildering cases, each more perplexing than the last. Tonight I shall recount an affair that, even after the passage of years, still sends a shiver down my spine. A tale woven with the haunting melody of a violin, a sudden tragic silence, and the relentless driving rain that seemed to wash away all trace of truth. Prepare yourselves for a narrative of baffling clues, ingenious deductions, and the unraveling of a most intricate crime, as seen through my eyes and witnessed by the keenest mind in all of England. If you find yourselves captivated by the unfolding enigma, I urge you to subscribe and join us for more such adventures. Now let's start with the first chapter of The Violin in the Rainy Night. Chapter 1. The Maestro's Final Note. The wind howled like a banshee through the narrow London streets that particular Tuesday evening in November, lashing sheets of rain against our Baker Street windows with a relentless fury. It was a night for contemplation by a roaring fire, for the rich aroma of Turkish tobacco, and for the quiet company of a good book. Indeed, I was engrossed in a treatise on tropical diseases, while Holmes, restless as ever, paced our sitting room, his lean figure casting long, dancing shadows upon the wall. He was, as was often the case in one of his periods of profound ennui, a state more dangerous to his constitution than any amount of physical exertion. "Watson," he suddenly declared, breaking the comfortable silence, the monotony of existence, presses heavily upon the soul. My mind, a finely tuned instrument, rusts for want of a worthy challenge. I confess I envy the very rats in the sewers their daily struggle for survival, for it provides a purpose, however base. I merely grunted, familiar with these pronouncements. Just as I considered offering him a game of chess, a sharp rap echoed from below, followed by Mrs. Hudson's hurried assent. A moment later, a frantic young man, dripping wet and disheveled, was ushered into our presence. He introduced himself breathlessly as Mr. Arthur Fenton, a junior inspector from Scotland Yard, his usually composed features contorted by a mixture of shock and urgency. "Mr. Holmes," he stammered, his eyes wide, "a most dreadful business. Signore, Antonio Rossi, the celebrated Italian violinist, he's been murdered." Holmes's languor vanished instantly, replaced by that keen, alert expression that never failed to fascinate me. "Rossi, you say? The virtuoso who's playing at the Royal Albert Hall last week captivated even my unmusical ear? Tell me, Fenton, what are the particulars?" "Found an hour ago, sir, by his housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, in his study on the second floor of his grand residence in Belgravia Square. A single stab wound to the heart. The room was locked from the inside, windows secured. No forced entry anywhere. In the house? It's a baffling one, sir. The local constabulary are quite at a loss. Locked from the inside, you say?" Holmes murmured, a spark igniting in his gray eyes. "And the weapon?" "Not found, Mr. Holmes. The most peculiar thing, though, his prize Stradivarius violin, the Serafina, reportedly worth a king's ransom, is missing. Its velvet-lined case lay open beside him. I felt a surge of excitement, a familiar thrill that always accompanied the promise of a new case. A celebrated figure, a locked room, a missing priceless object, and a rainy, windswept night. The ingredients were undeniably alluring. Holmes was already on his feet, reaching for his deerstalker and Inverness coat. "Come, Watson. Your medical expertise may prove invaluable, and my mind, it seems, has found its much-needed exercise. This Serafina business adds a most intriguing note to the score. A murder, yes, but also a theft of audacious proportions and a locked room to boot. Let us hope the rain has not washed away all traces of the truth, for a violin in the rainy night often sings a lament for a secret. Within minutes we were in a hansom cab, clattering through the deluge, the gas lamps blurring into elongated smudges of light. The journey to Belgravia Square felt interminable, each jolt of the cab deepening the sense of foreboding. As we approached Rossi's residence, a grand, imposing townhouse, the flashing blue light of a police lantern cast an eerie glow upon its rain-slicked facade. The scene was already bustling with constables, their capes glistening, their faces grim. Inspector Lestrade, a man of stout build and perpetually harassed expression, met us at the door. "Holmes, Watson, I'd hoped you'd come. This one's a proper tangle. Not a soul saw anything, and the whole house is a sealed tomb." He led us up a winding staircase, the silence of the house broken only by the drip of water from our coats and the heavy thud of our boots. The air grew colder, heavier, as we neared the second floor. At the end of a long corridor, a solitary door stood ajar, guarded by a constable. As Lestrade pushed it open further, a chill draught swept through, carrying with it the faint metallic scent of blood and a lingering, almost imperceptible whisper of expensive tobacco. The maestro's final stage was set, and the curtain had just been drawn on his life, leaving behind a profound silence and an unsettling enigma. Chapter 2. The echoes in the study. The study was a room of refined elegance, yet now it was a tableau of grim finality. Dark mahogany shelves lined with books, a grand fireplace where embers still glowed faintly, and heavy velvet curtains drawn tight against the storm outside. A Persian rug, once vibrant, was now marred by a dark, expanding stain. Signore Rossi lay sprawled beside a large, ornate desk, his hand still clutching at his breast, his face pale and contorted in a silent scream. He was dressed in a silk smoking jacket, and his thick, dark hair was disheveled. A single dark red rose lay wilted near his outstretched fingers, a stark contrast to the grim reality. Holmes wasted no time, his eyes sweeping across the room with a hawk-like intensity. He moved with a peculiar grace, a quiet predator surveying its domain, while I, as always, lingered slightly behind, taking mental notes for my own record. Lestrade, with a sigh of resignation, merely gestured for us to proceed. "The body has not been moved, Mr. Holmes, beyond a cursory examination for life signs, which were regrettably absent," Lestrade stated, his voice hushed. "Commendable, Inspector," Holmes replied without turning. "The integrity of a crime scene is paramount." "Watson, if you would." I knelt by the unfortunate maestro, my medical training kicking in. The wound was indeed precise, directly over the heart. A clean thrust, I observed, with a sharp, narrow blade. Death would have been instantaneous. I noted the pallor, the fixed stare, the absence of any defensive wounds. He was taken by surprise, or perhaps he knew his assailant. "Or did not fear them," Holmes added, his voice a low murmur. He was now examining the door frame, his magnifying glass glinting in the dim light. "You said the door was locked from the inside, Inspector?" "Absolutely, Mr. Holmes. Bolted, in fact. Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, found him when she came to deliver his evening tea. She had to fetch a handyman to force the lock, as her own key, which she claims she never used for the study, did not work. Even then, the bolt was still engaged from within." Holmes grunted, moving to the windows. He meticulously checked the latches, the sills, the tiny gaps where air might pass. "Secure, as you say. No signs of forced entry." "The chimney, perhaps?" He glanced up, but dismissed it with a shake of his head. "Too narrow for a man of any size, even a slender one, and quite sooty." "No, the murderer departed through the door, Inspector, despite your initial assessment." Lestrade bristled slightly. "But how, Mr. Holmes?" "It was bolted." Holmes ignored him, his gaze now fixed on the floor near the desk. He crouched, oblivious to the dampness, his long fingers carefully probing the thick pile of the rug. He then turned his attention to the desk itself. Papers were scattered, some pristine, others slightly crumpled. A half-finished letter, penned in a flowing Italian hand, lay open. Holmes picked it up with a pair of tweezers he produced from his coat pocket, holding it to the light. A letter to his sister, discussing an upcoming concert and a pressing financial matter, Holmes translated softly. He was a wealthy man, wasn't he, Inspector? By all accounts, Mr. Holmes. His concerts were always sold out, and the Serafina itself was insured for an astronomical sum, indeed. So robbery, as a primary motive whilst plausible for the violin, seems less so for the man himself, given the apparent lack of struggle or ransacking beyond the missing instrument. Why bother with the letter, one wonders, and why leave it exposed? Holmes's eyes narrowed. He then moved to the empty violin case, a masterpiece of polished wood and plush velvet. He ran a gloved finger along its interior. No dust. Recently opened. The marks of the Serafina are clearly defined here. A beautiful instrument, from what I recall. He then picked up the single red rose near Rossi's hand, examining it closely. A relatively fresh cut, though the bloom itself is a day or two old. Curious. A token, perhaps. I noted the subtle details Holmes observed, a faint smudge on the wallpaper near the door, barely visible. A tiny scratch on the polished surface of the desk, not quite matching the scattered papers. A peculiar alignment of a few books on a lower shelf, as if they had been disturbed and hastily replaced. "Inspector," Holmes finally said, rising, "have you ascertained the time of death?" "Dr. Harvey, our police surgeon, estimates between 9 and 10 o'clock, Mr. Holmes. Mrs. Gable last saw Signore Rossi alive around 8:30, when she brought him a glass of sherry. He was practicing a difficult passage then," she said. Holmes nodded slowly. "The rain began in earnest around 8:30, did it not, Watson?" "Indeed, Holmes, a true downpour, and the sound of a violin, even a magnificent one, would have been largely swallowed by such a deluge if the windows were open." Holmes's gaze lingered on the window panes, though they were now obscured by the rain. But they were closed and latched from the inside, so the sound would have been contained. Mrs. Gable heard nothing out of the ordinary after 8:30? "She claims not, Mr. Holmes. She retired to her own quarters directly after." Holmes hummed, a low, thoughtful sound. He then bent down once more, not by the body, but near the fireplace, his attention drawn to the faint ash on the rug. He carefully picked up a tiny metallic shard, almost invisible against the dark fibers. He held it to the light, his brow furrowed in concentration. "What is this, I wonder?" he mused, more to himself than to us. "Too small for a weapon fragment, too refined for mere debris. This case, Watson, has a melody of its own, but its key is still hidden. We have a locked room, a stolen violin, a mysterious fragment, and a killer who vanished like a phantom. The stage is set for a truly intricate performance, and I suspect the audience is not yet aware of the true nature of the drama unfolding within these walls." Chapter 3. The Broken Bow and the Perfumed Note. Holmes placed the minute metallic shard into a small evidence envelope, his eyes still holding that distant analytical gleam. This fragment, Lestrade, may prove to be more significant than a mere speck of dust. It bears the mark of fine craftsmanship, a detail that often speaks volumes in cases of this nature. Lestrade, though still somewhat bemused by Holmes's confident dismissal of the locked-room mystery, offered a grudging respect. "Very well, Mr. Holmes. I'll have our lab examine it. But what do you make of it all? No forced entry, no struggle, just a missing violin and a dead maestro." "The absence of a struggle, Inspector, is a most eloquent statement in itself," Holmes replied, straightening up. "It suggests familiarity, or perhaps an overwhelming surprise. Consider, Rossi was a man of considerable stature and likely passion. For him to be overcome without resistance implies either a trusted presence or an attack of such suddenness and precision that it precluded any defense. My initial thoughts veer towards the former. My own mind, less nimble than Holmes's, struggled to reconcile these points. But the locked room, Holmes? How could a trusted individual leave through a bolted door? That, my dear Watson, is the very crux of the matter, and one which I believe is subtly hinted at, rather than overtly challenged, by the scene before us. Holmes then moved towards a small, elegant writing desk situated in a corner, distinct as from the larger executive desk near the body. On it lay a beautifully carved letter opener and a small, ivory-backed hand mirror. Beside them, nestled amidst a few loose sheets of music, was a single, solitary violin bow. But it was not whole. It lay broken in two, the horsehair snapped, the delicate wood splintered near the frog. "Ah," Holmes breathed, a subtle intake of breath, a sign to me that something significant had registered. He picked up the broken pieces with utmost care. Now this, Inspector, is truly interesting. A broken bow, not merely a discarded one, but deliberately, violently snapped. "Perhaps he struggled with the assailant and it broke," Lestrade offered, ever keen to find a simple explanation. "Plausible, but unlikely," Holmes countered, examining the fractures. "The break is too clean, too deliberate, as if it were bent sharply over a knee, and there are no defensive wounds on Rossi's hands or arms to suggest a struggle involving the bow. Furthermore, this bow, I observe, is of a standard make, not the kind one would associate with a virtuoso who possessed a Stradivarius. It is, shall we say, a practice bull." He carefully placed the pieces on a clean handkerchief. This suggests a deeper, more personal conflict, perhaps unconnected to the theft of the Serafina at all. The murder and the theft, while appearing linked, may in fact be two separate acts, or at least driven by distinct motives. I furrowed my brow. Separate motives for the same event, Holmes? That seems convoluted. Life, my dear Watson, is often convoluted, and criminal enterprise even more so, he replied, a faint smile playing on his lips. The violin stolen, the man murdered. One might have been a calculated act of avarice, the other a consequence of passion, convenience, or even an entirely different narrative altogether. The broken bow points to an emotional rather than purely mercenary dimension. Holmes's gaze fell upon a small, silver-framed photograph on the mantelpiece. It depicted a stunning woman with dark, expressive eyes and a cascade of raven hair, her arm linked with Rossi's. He looked happy, almost triumphant in the picture. "Who is this woman, Inspector?" Holmes inquired, his voice low. Lestrade consulted his notebook. "Ah, yes, Signora Isabella Rossi, his wife. She's currently in Milan, visiting family. Left 3 weeks ago, is due back next week." "Milan, you say? And no immediate return after the news of her husband's death?" Holmes pondered this, a hint of suspicion in his tone. A rather prolonged absence for a devoted wife, especially a celebrated artist's spouse. And what of the maestro's personal life? Any recent acquaintances, disagreements, rivalries in the musical world? Lestrade sighed. "Well, Mr. Holmes, it seems Signore Rossi was not without his admirers. Several women, I believe, were quite taken with him. And then there are always the jealous competitors in the musical circles. But nothing concrete, no specific threats." Just then a constable approached with a small folded note enclosed in a silk sachet. "Found this tucked under the cushion of an armchair, Mr. Holmes. Looks like it might have been dropped." Holmes took it, his nostrils flaring slightly as he brought it closer. "Ah, a delicate scent of jasmine, Watson, and an expensive parchment. The handwriting, elegant yet forceful." He carefully unfolded the note. It contained only a few lines, penned in a graceful, looping script. "My dearest Antonio, the secret we share binds us, yet also threatens to tear us asunder. I must see you tonight, for there are matters of grave importance that cannot wait. I shall come at the stroke of 9, regardless of the storm. Do not fail me. Forever yours, L. Holmes's eyes scanned the note once more. Then he looked up, his gaze intense. 9 o'clock, the approximate time of death. Re, a significant initial. And the secret we share binds us, yet also threatens to tear us asunder. This, Watson, is not a simple dalliance. This is a matter of profound consequence, potentially involving blackmail, a hidden past, or a love affair with fatal implications. The plot thickens, and the symphony of crime begins to play its next, more ominous movement. The locked room remains, but the door to human passion has just been flung wide open. Chapter 4. The Housekeeper's Tale and the Phantom Key. A secret, a lover, and a rendezvous at the very hour of death, I mused aloud, as we descended the grand staircase, leaving Lestrade to oversee the meticulous but slow work of his constables. It certainly adds a layer of intrigue, Holmes, but how does it all connect to the locked room and the missing Stradivarius? Holmes walked briskly, his mind already several steps ahead. The connections, my dear Watson, are precisely what we must establish. The note, perfumed and urgent, provides a powerful impetus for Rossi to open his door to someone he knew, someone who bore a secret with him. This dispenses with the need for forced entry entirely. But the bolt, Holmes. Mrs. Gable explicitly stated it was engaged from within. Indeed she did. And that, Watson, is where the true ingenuity lies. No crude forcing of the lock, no broken windows. This killer possessed an understanding of mechanics, or perhaps a unique means of access and egress. The metallic fragment I found, it might be a key to that very puzzle. Our next stop was the housekeeper's quarters, a small but immaculately kept apartment on the ground floor. Mrs. Gable, a gaunt woman with weary eyes and a perpetually worried expression, was in a state of nervous agitation, clutching a teacup, as if for dear life. "Oh, Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she began, her voice trembling. "I can scarcely believe it. Signore Rossi, such a kind man if a little temperamental about his music. And that beautiful violin gone." Holmes offered her a reassuring smile, a rare display of gentleness from him. "Pray, Mrs. Gable, recount to us your movements yesterday evening." Every detail, however insignificant it may seem, she began to speak, her voice gaining a little strength with the telling. "Well, I brought Signore Rossi his sherry at 8:30 just as the rain started. He was in his study practicing, as he often did before a big concert. He was playing a very sad piece, I remember. He seemed a little preoccupied, a little distant. He thanked me, and I went back down to my room, as I always do. I knitted for an hour or so, then went to bed. Heard nothing unusual, only the wind and the rain." "Did anyone else call at the house, Mrs. Gable?" Holmes pressed. "No, sir. Not that I saw or heard. The front door was locked, bolted even, from 7 o'clock, as is our custom. And the back entrance, too. And the study door, Mrs. Gable, was it locked when you left Signore Rossi?" "No, sir. He rarely locked it when he was in. He said he liked to hear the music echoing through the house. But it was definitely bolted from the inside when I found him this morning after I broke it down." She wrung her hands. "My spare key to the study, it just wouldn't turn, not with the bolt thrown. Did Signore Rossi have any regular visitors, or perhaps someone he was expecting specifically yesterday evening?" Holmes asked, his eyes never leaving her face. Mrs. Gable hesitated, her gaze flitting nervously. "Well, sir, there was a lady, a very elegant lady. She called upon him quite frequently in the past few months, always in the late evening, usually. When the Signora was away, she'd arrive in a closed carriage, and Signore Rossi would always meet her himself at the door." "Can you describe her, Mrs. Gable?" "Her name?" "Oh, I never heard her name, sir. Signore Rossi was very discreet, but she was tall, with light brown hair, and always wore a veil, though I sometimes glimpsed her eyes, very striking. Blue, I think. She always smelled of jasmine, and she carried a small silver-tipped cane, though she seemed quite able-bodied. My gaze met Holmes's. Jasmine. The scent of the note, and the L initial. Could it be Lady L, or perhaps a name like Louise? And did this lady call last night, Mrs. Gable? The housekeeper wrung her hands again. I couldn't say for sure, sir. I was in my quarters. But there was a carriage, I think, just after 9. I heard the distant clatter on the wet cobbles, and the sound of it stopping, then moving off again after a short while. I didn't think much of it at the time with the storm, you see. A carriage, stopping and leaving shortly after 9. Holmes repeated thoughtfully. And yet you heard no one enter or leave the house, nor did you hear any sound of an argument or struggle from the study. No, sir, nothing. Just the rain. Holmes thanked Mrs. Gable, a flicker of something close to satisfaction in his eyes. As we left her, he turned to me. Watson, our L is becoming less ethereal. A lady with jasmine perfume, blue eyes, a silver-tipped cane who calls by carriage at precisely the time of death. The missing Seraphina and the broken practice bow begin to form a more cohesive picture, but the locked room remains, and it is a most cunning lock, for it must have permitted egress to the killer while leaving no trace. A key, perhaps, but not in the conventional sense. The phantom key, Watson. That is what we must uncover next. Chapter 5. The Maestro's Secrets and a Composer's Rage. The phantom key, I repeated as our hansom navigated the slick streets back towards Baker Street. A most intriguing concept, Holmes. Do you suggest a trick lock or some hidden passage unknown to Mrs. Gable? Holmes merely steepled his fingers, his gaze fixed on the passing gas lights. Neither, my dear Watson, though your imagination does you credit. The solutions to these architectural puzzles are often far simpler, yet more audacious, than grand secret passages. The metallic fragment I found may well be our first tangible link to this key, not necessarily to the lock itself, but to the methods of its operation. He paused, then continued, Let us consider what we have. A celebrated violinist, Signore Antonio Rossi, murdered at approximately 9 o'clock, a note perfumed with jasmine from a mysterious L, arranging a meeting at that exact hour, confessing to a shared secret and a threat. The victim's priceless Stradivarius, the Seraphina, stolen, a practice bow broken, and, most importantly, a study locked from the inside, with no apparent means of escape for the killer. Mrs. Gable's testimony about a carriage arriving and departing around 9 further solidifies the timing and the potential identity of our L. But the motive, Holmes? I pressed. Is it purely the secret L speaks of, leading to a crime of passion? Or is the theft of the Seraphina a separate, calculated act of robbery? Precisely the question, Watson. Let us delve into Rossi's life. A celebrated musician, yes, but what lay beneath the virtuoso's veneer? These artistic temperaments often conceal a labyrinth of passions, rivalries, and often considerable debts incurred in the pursuit of a lavish lifestyle, despite his reputed wealth. The financial matter mentioned in his letter to his sister, for instance. Our research began the moment we returned to Baker Street. Holmes dispatched a telegraph to his network of irregulars, the Baker Street irregulars, instructing them to scour the city's music shops, pawnbrokers, and back alleys for any sign of the Seraphina. He then immersed himself in dusty volumes of music critiques and society gossip, seeking any mention of Rossi's personal or professional entanglements. By late afternoon, our efforts began to yield fruit. One of Holmes's contacts, a theatrical agent with a nose for scandal, provided a tantalizing tidbit. Rossi, it seemed, had a history of acquiring the compositions of less fortunate, often desperate musicians, claiming them as his own, and performing them to great acclaim, sometimes for a nominal fee, sometimes for nothing more than a promise of future patronage that rarely materialized. A predator, then, in the artistic sense, Holmes murmured, tapping a finger against a newspaper clipping detailing Rossi's triumphant performance of a newly discovered sonata, supposedly an obscure Italian piece, but now revealed to be the work of a young, struggling British composer named Elias Thorne. And Mr. Elias Thorne, I note, died in poverty just 6 months ago after a prolonged illness exacerbated by, shall we say, a lack of recognition for his genius and mounting financial despair. A rather tragic end for a promising talent. Could Thorne's death be connected? I wondered. Revenge, perhaps, by a friend or relative? A possibility, Watson. A very strong one. Artistic plagiarism can ignite passions as fierce as any romantic betrayal. The broken practice bow, which I initially linked to L, might also fit this narrative, a symbol of shattered dreams, a career broken by Rossi's deceit. Perhaps L is not merely a lover, but an avenger. Just as this new avenue of thought opened, a new report arrived from Lestrade. The police had interviewed Thorne's landlady, who, recalling her former tenant's bitter complaints about Rossi, recalled a frequent visitor to Thorne's humble lodgings in the months before his death. A young woman, quiet but intense, with striking blue eyes, who always wore a modest veil and carried a walking stick, due to a slight limp, the landlady thought, though she had never seen it clearly. She also noted the young lady often smelled, faintly, of jasmine. Her name, the landlady recalled, was Miss Lydia Atherton, a former student of Thorne's devoted to his work. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Lydia Atherton, L. Blue eyes, jasmine, a cane, and a deep personal connection to a man wronged by Rossi. The pieces are beginning to coalesce, Watson. The Serafina may have been stolen, not for its monetary value, but as a symbolic act, a piece of Rossi's soul taken, just as he took Thorne's. And the metallic fragment? Could it be from a broken cane, or perhaps a unique implement of revenge? But the locked room, Holmes, I insisted, my mind still grappling with this central enigma. How did Miss Atherton or anyone escape a bolted study? Holmes rose, a glint of triumph in his eyes. That, Watson, is the grand deception. I believe I have a theory, a bold one, that reconciles all the impossible elements. The key, you see, was not to the lock, but to the perception of the lock. And our Miss Atherton, if indeed she is our L, possessed a certain audacity and perhaps a hidden accomplice, or a hidden talent for illusion. The stage, my friend, is almost set for the final act of this chilling concerto. We must pay a visit to the late Elias Thorne's former haunts and seek out Miss Atherton, for the truth of the Serafina and the maestro's final breath lies intertwined with the echoes of a stolen melody. Chapter 6. The Pawnshop's Secret and a Silent Accomplice. The following morning, the pervasive gray of London seemed to mirror the somber nature of our investigation. Holmes, unusually silent during our hurried breakfast, devoured the morning papers, searching for any further details concerning Rossi's demise, but found only the sensationalized accounts already familiar to us. Our focus, however, was now firmly fixed on Miss Lydia Atherton and the late Elias Thorne. The first order of business, Watson, Holmes declared, pushing away his plate, is to ascertain the precise nature of the Serafina's disappearance. If Miss Atherton, as a student of Thorne's, sought to avenge his intellectual theft, the violin's value would be symbolic rather than monetary. However, the opportunity for such a valuable theft would be difficult to ignore. Therefore, the possibility of an accomplice or a separate party cannot be dismissed. Our initial inquiries led us to a grimy pawnshop in the less salubrious district of Whitechapel, a place where stolen treasures often found a temporary resting place before vanishing into the criminal underworld. Holmes had an uncanny network of informants in such establishments, and a single cryptic telegram had already set the wheels in motion. Mr. Ebenezer Silas, the proprietor, a man whose features resembled a starved ferret, eyed Holmes with a mixture of fear and grudging respect. Ah, Mr. Holmes, I suspected your keen interest when I received the inquiry. The Seraphina, you say? A rare bird indeed. But no, nothing of that caliber has passed through my humble establishment. Nothing, Mr. Silas? Holmes's voice was deceptively mild, but his eyes held a steely glint. Are you quite certain? Perhaps not the entire instrument, but a component? A case, perhaps, or even a set of strings unusually fine that might have been part of the instrument's accessories. Silas shifted uncomfortably. Well, Mr. Holmes, there was a case, a very fine velvet-lined case, brought in by a young man, a nervous type, late last night. Claimed he found it in an alley. I gave him a trifle for it, just to be rid of him. It wasn't the violin, mind you, just the empty case. The empty case, Holmes repeated, his brow furrowed. And the description of this young man? Thin, pale, with shifty eyes, wearing a cheap, ill-fitting coat. Couldn't have been more than 20. Seemed desperate for the few shillings. And the case itself, Mr. Silas? It's in the back, Mr. Holmes. I was going to strip it for the velvet good quality that. Didn't think anyone would come looking for an empty violin case. Holmes retrieved the case, confirming its identity as the very one from Rossi's study. He meticulously examined it, his fingers tracing the interior. No, this is not merely an empty case. It has been emptied. And the young man's story of finding it in an alley, highly improbable for an item of this quality. This suggests the Stradivarius was removed elsewhere, and the case then disposed of, perhaps to create a diversion, or to remove a valuable piece of evidence from the actual location of the violin. But who would dispose of the case, and why? I pondered. And where is the violin now? That, Watson, is a question that requires a deeper understanding of our L. If Miss Atherton is indeed our culprit, she likely has an accomplice, someone perhaps less refined, more desperate, who could be tasked with such a mundane yet crucial piece of evidence disposal. The young man described by Silas fits the profile of a street runner, a likely associate of some criminal gang. Our next stop was the humble lodgings of the late Elias Thorne. It was a stark contrast to Rossi's opulent residence, a cramped, sparsely furnished room in a dilapidated tenement. The landlady, a kindly but stoic woman, confirmed Miss Atherton's frequent visits. She was a true friend to Mr. Thorne, the landlady recounted, her voice tinged with sadness. Always brought him books, fresh flowers, and helped him with his music. She adored his compositions. Said they were pure genius, too good for this world, she did. Did Miss Atherton possess any peculiar habits, madam? Holmes inquired. A certain gait, perhaps, or a distinctive accessory. Oh, yes, Mr. Holmes. She had a slight limp, always used a cane, a beautiful one, silver-tipped, if I recall, and she always smelled of jasmine. Said it reminded her of her mother's garden, the silver-tipped cane, the jasmine scent, the blue eyes. All the details from Mrs. Gable's description of L perfectly matched Miss Lydia Atherton. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, but the locked room remained the stubborn, final obstacle. Did you ever notice Miss Atherton arriving or departing in a carriage, madam? I asked. The landlady shook her head. No, sir. She always walked, or sometimes took a hansom, but never a private carriage. She was a lady of modest means for all her refined ways. This contradicted Mrs. Gable's observation of L arriving in a carriage. Holmes's eyes narrowed. A discrepancy, Watson, significant. Either Mrs. Gable was mistaken, or Miss Atherton used a carriage only on special occasions, such as her fateful visit to Rossi, or there is more than one L. Just as this thought took root, one of the Baker Street irregulars, a street urchin named Wiggins, burst in, breathless. Mr. Holmes, I followed a lead. A known fenceman, Slippery Jim, was bragging last night about acquiring a fiddle of immense value. He was meeting someone at a derelict warehouse by the Thames an hour from now, in the fog. Holmes's expression hardened. Excellent, Wiggins. The Serafina, then, is still in London. This changes everything. It means our L may indeed be seeking to profit from the theft, or perhaps to use the sale as a means to expose Rossi's perfidy. And the discrepancy with the carriage, Watson? It hints at a subtle manipulation, a deliberate blurring of identities. The time for observation is over. We must act, for the Serafina is about to change hands, and with it, perhaps, the last hope of unraveling this intricate web of deceit and revenge. And with the missing violin, the complete story of Rossi's murder may yet be revealed, for its true melody has yet to be played. Chapter 7. The Riverside Rendezvous and a Glimpse of the Shadow. The air along the Thames was thick with a chilling, pre-dawn fog, wrapping the ancient city in a shroud of impenetrable mystery. The faint glow of gas lamps struggled to pierce the gloom, casting elongated, wavering shadows that danced like phantoms. The desolate stretch of warehouses near the docks was a perfect stage for clandestine dealings, a place where secrets were exchanged and illicit fortunes made. Holmes, cloaked in his long Inverness, moved with the stealth of a cat, his eyes scanning every shifting outline, every hint of movement. I, following closely, found my hand instinctively drawn to the revolver tucked inside my coat. The fog. "Watson is both our friend and our enemy," Holmes whispered, his voice barely audible above the lapping of the river against the pilings. "It provides concealment, but also obscures the very details we desperately seek. Keep your eyes and ears open. Slippery Jim is a cunning fox, and whoever he deals with will be equally wary." We found a vantage point behind a stack of crates, from where we could observe the entrance to a particularly dilapidated warehouse. After a tense period of waiting, a solitary figure emerged from the swirling mists, moving with a nervous energy. It was the young man Mr. Silas had described, thin, pale, dressed in a threadbare coat, his eyes darting anxiously about. He exchanged a few hushed words with another figure, a burly man with a shifty gaze, whom I recognized as Slippery Jim. The young man then produced a long, narrow package, carefully wrapped in oilskin, from beneath his coat. Even from our distance, the shape was unmistakable. A violin. "The Serafina," Holmes murmured, a grim satisfaction in his tone. So our young accomplice is not merely a disposal agent, but directly involved in the theft and the fence's transaction. This confirms a pecuniary motive for the violin's disappearance, perhaps separate from the initial, more personal motive for the murder. Just as the exchange was about to take place, a third figure detached itself from the fog, moving with a fluid grace that belied the treacherous ground. She was tall and slender, veiled, and carried a distinctive silver-tipped cane. The scent of jasmine, though faint in the damp air, reached us. It was unmistakably Miss Lydia Atherton. My breath caught in my throat. "Holmes, it's her, Miss Atherton." Holmes nodded, his eyes gleaming. "Indeed, Watson, our L has arrived to oversee her illicit transaction. This complicates matters, for it suggests that the theft of the violin is integral to her plan, not a mere afterthought. But why would she, a woman of apparent refinement and devotion to Thorne, engage in such a transaction? Revenge? Yes, but also profit? Or is the profit a means to an end? Miss Atherton spoke briefly with Slippery Jim, her voice low and firm, even through the veil. She then turned her attention to the young man, a sharp, almost contemptuous tone in her words. The young man visibly flinched, then sullenly handed over a small bundle of cash to Slippery Jim. It was clear she was the orchestrator, the true power behind the deal. Suddenly a loud whistle pierced the fog, the prearranged signal of the police. Lestrade, alerted by Holmes, had planned a raid. Constables, materializing from the swirling mist, descended upon the scene. Slippery Jim, ever resourceful, darted into the warehouse, attempting to escape, but was quickly apprehended. The young man in his panic dropped the violin and tried to flee, but a quick-thinking constable tackled him. Miss Atherton, however, reacted with surprising agility. She flung herself towards the riverbank, her veiled figure a fleeting shadow against the gray expanse of the Thames. Despite her cane and apparent limp, she moved with remarkable speed. After her, Watson. Holmes cried, already in pursuit. She is the key to the entire affair. We plunged into the fog, our boots splashing in the muddy puddles. The chase was frantic, disorienting. The shouts of constables echoed around us, muffled by the dense mist. Miss Atherton, agile and determined, seemed to vanish into the impenetrable veil. We heard a splash. "She's gone into the river," I exclaimed, my heart sinking. "She's drowned herself." "No, Watson," Holmes said, his voice grim, as he peered into the swirling currents. "Not drowned. She swims, and quite powerfully. But look there." He pointed to a small, barely visible boat, a dinghy being swiftly rowed away into the deeper fog by a second, shadowy figure. An accomplice, Watson. A planned escape. The boat was waiting for her. We had lost her. The fog had provided the perfect screen for her disappearance, leaving us with only the recovered Stradivarius, the captured fence, and the terrified young man. Holmes, though momentarily frustrated, quickly regained his composure. He turned his attention to the young man, who was now shivering, less from the cold than from fear. "Who is this woman, boy?" Holmes demanded, his voice cutting through the fog. "And where is the violin truly meant to go?" The young man, terrified, stammered, I don't know her name, sir. Just L. She told me to meet Jim, sell the violin, said it was for a debt, said she'd pay me a cut. I swear, sir." Holmes picked up the Serafina, his fingers caressing its polished wood. "A debt," he says, "not merely profit, but a repayment. A debt of honor, perhaps, or a debt of blood." His eyes, though weary, still held their piercing intensity. "Our L is more formidable than I initially surmised, Watson. She has a network, resources, and a fierce determination. She has escaped us for now, but she has left behind the most crucial piece of evidence, the Serafina itself, and with the retrieval of the stolen instrument, the final perplexing detail of the locked room now begins to shine with a terrible clarity. For the very object of the theft might hold the secret to the murderer's audacious escape. Chapter 8. The Weight of the Stradivarius and the False Limp. Back at Baker Street, the retrieved Serafina lay on our sitting-room table, its exquisite craftsmanship glowing even in the pale morning light filtering through the window. Its presence seemed to dispel the lingering chill of the riverside fog, yet it deepened the mystery surrounding Signore Rossi's murder. Holmes examined it with the reverence of a connoisseur, his fingers tracing the delicate curves of its F-holes. "A magnificent instrument, Watson," he murmured, his voice soft. "Its tone, they say, is incomparable. But its true value in this case lies not in its music, but in its weight." I looked at him, puzzled. "Its weight, Holmes. How could that be relevant to a locked-room murder?" "Patience, my dear Watson. All will become clear. But first, let us review our current understanding. We have identified L as Miss Lydia Atherton, a former student of the late Elias Thorne, a composer whose work Rossi shamelessly plagiarized. We know she harbored a deep devotion to Thorne and a profound resentment towards Rossi. She sought a meeting with Rossi at the approximate time of his death, leaving a note perfumed with jasmine, discussing a secret and an impending confrontation. She possessed a silver-tipped cane and had a distinctive limp, or so we were told, and she orchestrated the sale of the Serafina through an accomplice, but escaped capture herself. "But the limp, Holmes," I interjected. "At the riverside she moved with surprising agility, even when fleeing. It was almost as if the limp was feigned," Holmes finished, a knowing look in his eyes. "Precisely, Watson. A crucial observation. It suggests a deliberate deception, a cultivated persona, perhaps a means to appear less threatening, or to gain sympathy, or more cunningly, a means to plant an alibi, a physical limitation that would make a quick escape seem impossible, thus diverting suspicion. Holmes then turned his attention back to the Stradivarius. He held it carefully, testing its balance, its feel. This instrument, Watson, is not merely a violin. It is a piece of history, an object of immense beauty, and, crucially, a specific physical entity with definite dimensions and mass. Have you considered, Watson, the ingenious method by which our killer might have exited the locked room? I racked my brain. A secret passage you dismissed. A trick lock you also doubted. A hidden key? But what kind of key? Not a key to the lock itself, Watson, but a key to the perception of the lock, Holmes reiterated, his eyes gleaming. The metallic fragment I found near the fireplace. I have had it examined. It is a fragment of a very finely crafted, highly tempered steel spring mechanism, and the distinctive scratch on the desk near where the letter lay? It was caused by something being dragged across it precisely the width of this fragment, but larger, heavier. He picked up the Stradivarius again. Let us imagine, Watson, that Signore Rossi at 9 o'clock, admitted Miss Atherton. The conversation turns heated. Perhaps Rossi gloats or denies Thorne's genius. The broken practice bow symbolizes her rage, her desire to smash his perceived artistic fraud. In a fit of passion, or perhaps a premeditated act, she stabs him with a narrow, sharp blade, the weapon we still seek. But then the locked room. How to escape? Holmes began to pace, the Stradivarius still in his hands. Consider the nature of a door bolt, Watson. It is a simple mechanism. A metal bar slides into a housing in the doorframe. If the bolt is engaged from the inside, it means someone must have manually pushed it across. But what if, my dear Watson, the bolt was not engaged by a hand, but by something else entirely? He set the violin down and picked up a thin, flexible length of wire he had retrieved from his collection of oddities. Imagine, Watson, that our killer, after committing the deed, did not simply walk out. Imagine instead that she had a device, perhaps a length of wire or a thin, strong cord attached to the bolt. When she left, pulling the door shut behind her, she merely had to pull the wire, drawing the bolt across from the outside. The fragment of steel spring, perhaps part of a cunning retrieval mechanism for the wire, or a small, collapsible hook designed to catch the bolt's handle. I stared at him, my jaw dropping. But the police examined the bolt. They'd have seen a wire. But the wire would have been retracted, Watson, Holmes explained patiently, and the fragment found near the fireplace suggests that the device, after being used, was either discarded or fell apart as she attempted to remove it. A small, almost imperceptible gap between the door and the frame would allow such a thin wire to pass through, and the sound of the storm, the heavy rain, would have masked any faint click or creak of the bolt being drawn, and the missing Serafina. I finally grasped the connection. It wasn't just a trophy or a means of profit. It was a prop dam. Its value was a diversion, Holmes, but its weight, its very dimensions were part of the escape. Holmes nodded slowly, a triumphant gleam in his eyes. Precisely, Watson. The Stradivarius itself, being a valuable and relatively bulky object, would demand the killer's full attention, serving as a perfect distraction. The young man, the accomplice, was likely waiting to receive it immediately after the murder, thus giving our L a plausible reason to be seen leaving the house with the instrument, making her exit less suspicious if anyone happened to glimpse her in the rain-swept square. The disposal of the empty case was further misdirection. The primary motive, I am convinced, was revenge for Thorne, and the Serafina was both a symbol of Rossi's stolen glory and an ingenious part of the locked room escape. The false limp, the jasmine scent, the urgent note, all calculated to deceive. We have our killer, Watson, and now we have the method. The final act, the confrontation, must be orchestrated with the utmost care, for our L is not merely a murderer, but a master of deceit, and her final performance will be her most dangerous yet. Chapter 9. The Maestro's Legacy and the Unmasking. A master of deceit indeed, Holmes, I remarked, still reeling from the sheer audacity of Miss Atherton's method. To use the very instrument of the crime, or rather the object of its associated theft as a means to effect a locked-room escape. It is diabolical in its cleverness. Ingenious, Watson, and deeply revealing, Holmes corrected, a glint in his eye. It tells us that our culprit, Miss Lydia Atherton, possesses not only a fierce intellect but also a dramatic flair. A mind capable of such intricate planning is not one to be underestimated. She would have observed the mechanics of the study door, perhaps during her previous visits, and formulated this elaborate deception. The false limp and the perfumed note were all part of this calculated performance, designed to create a specific impression and deflect suspicion. Our task now was to lure Miss Atherton out of the shadows, to peel back the layers of her deception and confront her with the truth. Holmes, ever the strategist, decided upon a ruse that would appeal to her artistic sensibilities and her unwavering devotion to Elias Thorne. He arranged for a discreet notice to be placed in the major London papers, announcing a private memorial concert for Signore Antonio Rossi to be held at a prestigious but undisclosed location. The notice subtly hinted at a grand reveal concerning Rossi's musical legacy, promising to honor the true origins of his greatest performances. Knowing her deep-seated desire to see Thorne's genius recognized, Holmes surmised that this would be an irresistible bait. The next evening, under a moonless, overcast sky, Holmes, Lestrade, and I positioned ourselves within the hushed elegance of a private salon near Covent Garden. The room was set up as if for a small, exclusive gathering. A grand piano, a few unoccupied chairs, and a spotlight trained on an empty velvet stand where a violin would typically rest. The Serafina itself was securely stored away, a silent witness. A short time later, a hansom cab pulled up outside. A figure, elegantly dressed in dark attire, her face obscured by a heavy veil, stepped out. She still carried the silver-tipped cane, though I noticed her gait was now slightly more pronounced, as if she were consciously exaggerating her limp. The faint, unmistakable scent of jasmine preceded her. It was Miss Lydia Atherton. She entered the salon, her eyes sweeping the empty room, a hint of unease flickering in their blue depths. She expected a gathering, an audience, perhaps even a chance to expose Rossi's perfidy publicly. Instead, she found only the eerie silence of an empty stage. Then, from the shadows, Holmes stepped forward, his figure tall and imposing. "Good evening, Miss Atherton, or should I say, L." She started, her hand clutching her cane, her veiled head turning sharply. "Who are you? And what is the meaning of this? Where is the concert?" Her voice, though strained, held an aristocratic timbre. "The concert?" "Miss Atherton," Holmes replied, his voice calm but authoritative, "is about to begin. And you, I regret to inform you, are the unfortunate soloist." He gestured towards Lestrade and myself, who now emerged from the shadows. "This is Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard, and my colleague, Dr. Watson." Her composure, though shaken, held firm. "I do not understand." "I was invited here to commemorate Signore Rossi's remarkable contribution to music. What possible interest could Scotland Yard have in me?" "Your contribution to Signore Rossi's final performance, Miss Atherton, is precisely our interest," Holmes retorted, his eyes piercing through her veil. "We know of your devotion to Elias Thorne, a devotion that tragically led you to take justice into your own hands. We know of the secret you shared with Rossi, the stolen compositions, the uncredited genius, and we know of your rendezvous at 9 o'clock in his study on that rainy night." Her face, though still veiled, seemed to tighten. "You speak of fancies, Mr. Holmes. I was not in London that night. I was visiting a sick aunt in Kent. I have witnesses." "Ah, the cultivated alibi," Holmes said with a dismissive wave. And the feigned limp Miss Atherton intended to support your story of being too frail to travel in such haste. A clever touch. But the housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, described Elle arriving in a carriage. Your landlady, however, states you only ever walked or took a hansom. This discrepancy, combined with your surprising agility during your escape by the Thames, leads me to conclude that the limp is a deliberate fabrication. He continued, his voice rising. The Seraphina was not merely stolen, Miss Atherton. It was used as an integral part of your escape. You murdered Signore Rossi with a small, sharp blade, probably one you carried within your cane, whose metallic fragment I found near the fireplace. After committing the deed, you used a cleverly concealed wire threaded through the minuscule gap of the door to pull the bolt across from the outside, creating the illusion of a locked room. The heavy rain, the sound of the storm all played into your hands, masking the subtle sounds of your ingenious exit. Miss Atherton stood frozen, her cane clattering to the floor. The jasmine scent, once a pleasant perfume, now seemed cloying, sickly sweet. Her veil trembled, then slowly, deliberately she lifted it. Her striking blue eyes, now raw with a mixture of grief and defiance, met Holmes's. He deserved it, she whispered, her voice husky with emotion. He stole Elias's soul, his life's work. He paraded it as his own, while Elias starved, unrecognized. I only sought to expose him, to force a confession, but he merely laughed, arrogant and dismissive. He said Thorne was a fool, a failure, that his music was only valuable because Rossi played it. He broke Elias's practice bow, the one Thorne composed with right before my eyes, as a final insult. I simply could not bear it any longer. Her gaze hardened, a flicker of pride mingled with her despair. The Seraphina. Yes, I took it. It was his most prized possession, a symbol of his false glory. I meant to sell it and donate the proceeds to a fund for struggling musicians in Elias's name. It was not for personal gain. The method, Mr. Holmes, I confess, was born of desperation and a lifetime of observing the intricacies of theatrical illusion, a fitting end for a theatrical thief. She looked at Holmes, a strange, almost admiring glint in her eyes. You are indeed as brilliant as they say, Mr. Holmes. Every detail, every single minute detail, you truly see. Holmes merely inclined his head, his face impassive. Justice, Miss Atherton, finds its own melody, however intricate the score. Lestrade, if you please. As Lestrade stepped forward, Miss Atherton made no resistance. Her shoulders slumped, and a single tear traced a path down her cheek. The facade had crumbled, the performance ended. The truth, revealed in the stark light of Holmes's way, deductions, was far more tragic and complex than a simple murder and theft. It was a lament for a stolen legacy, played out on a rainy night, and now, finally, its haunting melody had found its ultimate resolution. Chapter 10. The Unseen Conductor and the Final Cadenza. With Miss Lydia Atherton's confession, the intricate tapestry of the violin in the rainy night finally unraveled, revealing a pattern woven from genius, jealousy, and despair. Her capture and the subsequent recovery of the Seraphina brought a grim satisfaction to our investigations, yet left an lingering sense of tragedy, as is so often the case when the human heart, driven to extremes, breaks the law. Back in our familiar comfort of our Baker Street sitting room, the Seraphina rested once more in its velvet-lined case, its silent presence a powerful reminder of the dark passions it had witnessed. Holmes, after a prolonged period of silence, now held forth, explaining the final nuances of the case, tying together every loose thread for my benefit and for the historical record. "You see, Watson," Holmes began, puffing thoughtfully on his pipe, the beauty of this case lay in its layered deception. Miss Atherton was not merely an avenger. She was a conductor, orchestrating a complex symphony of misdirection. Her true motive was righteous indignation on behalf of Elias Thorne, a man she clearly revered. The theft of the Serafina served multiple purposes: to symbolically wound Rossi, to provide a substantial sum for Thorne's legacy, and, most cunningly, to facilitate her escape. "The phantom key, as you called it, Holmes," I interjected, still marveling at her ingenuity. "Precisely. Her limp was a calculated prop. She was perfectly capable of moving with speed and agility when necessary, as demonstrated by her escape at the riverside. She would have used that cane not for support, but to carry the short, sharp stiletto that ended Rossi's life. The metallic fragment I found near the fireplace was, as I suspected, part of the spring-loaded mechanism that allowed the blade to be swiftly deployed and retracted from within the cane, leaving no direct weapon at the scene, only its residue. "And the locked room?" I pressed, keen to hear the full explanation once more. Ah, the masterpiece of her deception. The study door had a simple internal bolt. Miss Atherton, during her prior visits, would have noted its mechanics. After the murder, she would have secured a thin, strong fishing line or a similar cord to the bolt's handle. As she slipped out of the door, closing it almost completely behind her, she simply pulled the cord, drawing the bolt into place from the outside. The almost imperceptible gap between the door and its frame, common in older houses, allowed the cord to pass. Once the bolt was thrown, she would have used a small retractable hook, also likely concealed within her cane, to catch the cord and retrieve it, snapping it at the doorframe and discarding the small telling piece near the fireplace, where it would blend with the soot. But the force to snap the cord, Holmes, wouldn't that be difficult? Not if the cord was specifically chosen for its tensile strength, Watson, and if the hook provided the necessary leverage. The rain and wind, as I noted, would have muffled any faint sounds. She then handed the Serafina to her accomplice, the young man we apprehended, to dispose of the empty case and arrange for its sale, further complicating the trail. The discrepancy in the housekeeper's description of L arriving by carriage versus Miss Atherton's usual walking habits also played into this, a deliberate effort to create an aura of mystery and make her appear both a lady of means and a discreet visitor. So, the whole performance was designed to confuse, to suggest multiple culprits or an impossible crime. I concluded, a sense of awe washing over me. Indeed, Watson, a true virtuoso of deception, driven by a profound sense of injustice. Her confession, however, was as an unscripted cadenza, born of despair, but carrying the weight of truth. The police will now have a clearer path, though the legal system, alas, rarely accommodates the complexities of human motivation as elegantly as my deductions. Holmes leaned back, a faint smile playing on his lips. Another case closed, Watson. Another glimpse into the labyrinthine workings of the human mind and the strange, often beautiful, and sometimes terrible melodies it produces. And the Serafina will no doubt find its way to a new owner, perhaps to sing a happier tune, untainted by the sorrowful notes of its past. I closed my notebook, my thoughts lingering on the image of Lydia Atherton's defiant blue eyes. The violin, in the rainy night, would undoubtedly remain one of the most poignant and intellectually stimulating cases I had the privilege of chronicling. It was a testament to the fact that even in the darkest, rainiest corners of London, the light of truth, guided by the keenest of minds, would always pierce through the gloom. Thank you for joining me on this enthralling journey through the fog-laden streets and hidden secrets of London. If you wish to uncover more such mysteries with Mr. Sherlock Holmes and myself, do subscribe and stay tuned for our next adventure.